manifest destiny and westward expansion, starting with the group of people. The first people that really started our westward expansion were mountain men. Sounds kind of funny, but I'll give you a pretty solid description of mountain men. Most of us wouldn't be tough enough to be a mountain man, but a lot of us would dream of being one. And you'll understand why in just a little bit. So if you think you could, like for instance, I have Facebook. I know some of you do and some of you don't. But I have Facebook, and every once in a while on my thing on Facebook, it'll pop up like this beautiful little cabin on a lake in the mountains surrounded by trees. And it'll say, would you give up all of your technology and all of your people for a year and you get this cabin for free? Could you live in it for a year with no other people and no cell phone and no television? And I look at it and I think, yes. But a year is a long time without any social interaction. So I'm not really sure. So some of you are thinking, yes, I could, because I don't really like people that much anyway. And so what? I'll go fishing and hunting and climbing trees and have campfires. And a lot of us like a little bit of alone time, but I don't know if we can handle a year all by ourselves. We'd probably start scratching our ears off or something, talking to ourselves. We'd have a volleyball with a handprint on it, and it'd be our best friend anyway. So yeah, we'll talk about that and what kind of person it takes to be a mountain man in our westward expansion. Does anybody know what the term manifest destiny refers to? See?
Going west towards the Oregon.
Okay. What's the word destiny mean? It is fate. So some people believe in fate or destiny, and some people think that that's silly. Some of you, probably if I polled the class, half of you would believe in fate or destiny, and half of you would be like, nah, I create my own path through life. Fate or destiny means our path is already created, and we're just going through the motions. Like if you believe in destiny or fate, then you might believe that someone, a higher power, knows when you're going to die. Knows that you're going to be in a car accident when you're 25 and you're going to die. That'd be horrifying, I think, to know stuff like that. I don't want to know if that's going to happen because I just want to do my life, and the more successful I am, it's because I've worked hard to get what I've got. So I'm not a big believer in fate or destiny. But it'd sort of be like if I told you that Bird will someday marry his sister. Do you have a sister? Well, that's even weirder because she's not born yet. That means she's 13 years younger than you. That's his destiny, is to marry his sister. The nice thing is, they won't have to change anybody's last name. One wedding instead of two. It'll be nice for your parents. It'll be really weird. You all have the same friends too. Well, not really, because her friends are 13 years younger, so it's kind of creepy. I don't know why you think that way. But if I told you that's destiny, well, I guess we better plan a wedding, right? Okay, so most of us, and right now, Bird's thinking, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I probably need to find a girlfriend now. So he stops saying stuff like that. Caitlin. Oh, come on. If he says to you at lunch, he's like, hubba hubba. Let's go to Spider-Man Friday night. Oh, Spider-Man's a good movie. How about let's go to Sing 2 Friday night? Free tickets. Justin's paying.
I'll go.
God, yeah. You got all kinds of dates. Anyway, that's destiny. Okay, so maybe it exists. Maybe we create our own destiny. I'm not really sure. And your test was due now. Those of you that didn't do it, if it's not done by the time you leave lunch, then you don't care, and you're probably going to get a 0. So I'll check at the end of the third block, and you do what you need to do to get what you need to get. So that means if you got to skip lunch and do homework, then skip lunch and do homework. I really don't care if you have lunch. Or do homework while you're eating lunch. I don't care. Figure out a way to get it done since you're already late and I'm giving you extra time. Okay. We stopped the other day, I think right here. Does this look familiar? At least other classes were here. This is still chapter 12 or chapter 11. Does this look right? Okay, so the whole idea was the Missouri Compromise. And just a quick recap, and I want to move through this quickly because the story I'm going to tell you is kind of a long story today about westward expansion. Missouri hit that magical number. What's the magical number for a territory to apply for statehood? 60,000. Very good. I heard about 14 people say that. 60,000. Missouri says, okay, America, can we be a state? And Congress says, no. Missouri was a slave state, so there were slave owners in Missouri, especially the southern part of Missouri. Not very many slave owners, but Missouri was asking to be admitted as a slave-owning state where it was perfectly legal to own humans. The problem that Missouri has is in Congress, before Missouri, there was exactly the number of free states as slave states. So if we add a slave state, what happens to the balance of power in Congress? It goes towards the slave states. And if the slave states control the Senate, what kind of laws or legislation do they begin to pass? Pro-slave stuff. Nobody really wanted that because that causes arguments and issues among the senators. So they said, no. Okay, well, let's compromise. What if we take a chunk, and people think this is weird because Maine was at one point part of Massachusetts. They're not even really connected. So they said, what if we take this chunk of Massachusetts that's really disconnected from Maine, and there's 60-ish thousand people that live there, and Maine is as far north as you can get until we add Alaska. And there's no slaves in Maine. They're simple farmers. They don't have great big cotton plantations, so Maine would be a free state. So if we add a free state, can we add a slave state? Balance of power stays the same. And part of the compromise is then, this is the most important part of the compromise. We add Maine, we add Missouri. Any new states north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, that's that line on the map right there, have to be free states. So no new slave states north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude. So when Nebraska territory is ready to become a state, free or slave? Has to be free. What about Kansas? Free. Okay, remember that because later it's not that easy. So even though we agreed, we compromised in 1836 or whatever year this is, I can't remember. Compromised 1820, I think. We compromised that this is going to be no new slave states north of that line. We don't always remember what our promises were. What about Texas? Slave. Could be slave because it's south of that line. So remember that line. That's kind of critical, and that's why I'm taking the time to go back over it. Just really quickly, these two guys. We know Andrew Jackson. He was the hero of the War of 1812 because he won the Battle of New Orleans. Remember, that's the one that was after the war, but they didn't know a treaty had been signed. Yeah, this guy, he's kind of a firecracker. He takes off and captures Florida from the Spanish. The government didn't tell him to. He did it on his own. So could you imagine an American general comes to Washington, D.C., and he's like, hey, guys, just so you know, here's Florida. And Congress was like, oh, my God, you didn't attack Florida. And he's like, oh, yeah, it was easy. There wasn't anybody there to even defend it. And they're like, no, because there was a fear of war with the Spanish. We didn't want war. We're a little baby country. We can't afford. Wars are expensive and people die. You idiot. Fortunately, the Spanish didn't want war with the United States either, so we signed a treaty called the Treaty of Adams-Onis with the Spanish. They gave us Florida. Like, oh yeah. So now we have gators. Anyway, Florida's a big state. So we add to our country. Again, that's kind of part of our manifest destiny is to grow. Then this is the president at the time. He looks like a slickster. I don't know. His name's James Monroe. A doctrine is like a rule or a set of values that America should follow and the rest of the world should follow. Monroe sort of makes a threat. He tells the European powers, the Spanish, the British, and the French, you stay out of our business, the Western Hemisphere, and we'll stay out of Europe. So we won't get involved in European issues. You stay out of Western Hemisphere issues. He's not telling them you can't keep what you already have because there were still Spanish colonies in the Western Hemisphere. There were still French colonies in the Western Hemisphere, and the British still have Canada. So he's not telling them you can't keep what you've got, but what he's saying is, don't you be trying to expand. This is our turf. Don't mess with it. And the European powers, in return, we won't mess with your stuff. Do we really have enough power and authority to see ourselves as a world power? No. But we're sure acting like it. We're telling people what they can and cannot do. So that's kind of a big deal. So we'll come back to those ideas a little bit later on as we move into chapter 13.
We need the vocab.
You don't need it because we already tested over that chapter. So I just wanted to make sure that you've understood the Missouri Compromise and the Monroe Doctrine, because those are two ideas that we'll come back to and play around with a little bit later on. So your chapter 13 notes are in Google Classroom. And this, it's got a nice, neat looking background. Manifest destiny. It's our certain fate. Now, what is America's manifest destiny? We didn't get that far. We were too busy talking about Justin marrying his sister that doesn't exist. What if you have like a stepsister that you don't even know about that's been adopted away and you meet her? What if Caitlin is actually your sister and you do a DNA test, you're like, oh my gosh, we're related. And your long lost sister, that'd be weird. It'd ruin your whole date. You can't date your sister. That's not okay. That's weird. Yeah, but that's weird. We can't do that. We can't let him do that. We got to stop it. Well, that's true. Here's America's destiny, or what we see as our manifest destiny, is to control the continent from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. We're already 2/3 the way there with the Louisiana Purchase all the way to the Rocky Mountains, but then we've got that chunk on the west coast that's not ours yet. It's not to control the world. It's not to control North America. We want to control the continent from east to west, from Atlantic to Pacific. Do we have a need for that much land, at least at this time in history? No. In fact, we haven't filled what we've got. So you could probably say that our manifest destiny is at least a little bit greedy. We want to take things that we don't even need it, we just want it. Eventually, we'll need it, but at this time, no, not really. So we've got to get people there. But there's this weird sort of allure, and not even an allure, more like folklore or stories that people hear about the American West. And this Kiowa poet, Kiowa is a Native American, this Kiowa poet named N. Scott Momaday writes this little quote. He says, "The American West is a place that has to be seen to be believed, and sometimes it may have to be believed in order to be seen." What is he saying about the American West, Zane?
Probably you have to at least try to go there. I don't know. I had the idea in my mind and I
Okay. Has to be seen to be believed, and it may have to be believed in order to be seen. Because you just can't read about it. By the way, no photographs, right? So we can imagine a lot of places because we can see photographs. To go there to believe it, because the stories about the American West are so wild. Can you imagine herds of 200,000 buffalo on the plains? These creatures that are so gigantic and enormous that they're the largest mammal in North America. They're not elephants, but they're certainly not cows. They're huge and powerful, and there's hundreds of thousands of them in these gigantic herds that just roam around eating grass. And there's 6 million of them out on the Great Plains. Those numbers are just so crazy. Or you get into the Rocky Mountains and it's untouched wilderness. Of course, there's Native Americans there, but we dismiss the idea of Native Americans at this time. They don't matter, and we'll just take from them what we want to take from them. So it's such an unimaginable place where the resources are abundant, and the grass on the plains is 4 feet tall, and there's plenty of game, and you can just shoot a buffalo if you're hungry. And when you get to the mountains, there's furry creatures running all over the place, and those furry creatures all are made of dollar signs. Because everybody in Europe wants beaver skin hats. Everybody that's got money wants, and the problem is, Europe was trapped out a century earlier, and as we've headed west, what have we done to the beavers and the mink and the otters and all of the furry creatures? We've killed them off because we're hunting them out. We get to the Rockies, and they're all over the place, and it's like, booyah! It's unbelievable until you go there and see it. So the first people that we're going to send there, the firstest pioneers are mountain men. And their number one goal is to trap furry creatures. How important is the fur trade? Well, the richest man in the world owned a fur company. His fur company was called the American Fur Company. His name was John Jacob Astor. Astor had millions of dollars. Now that sounds kind of funny to us when we talk about Jeff Bezos and his $100 billion. But the richest man in the 1800s at this time had millions of dollars, and all of it came from the fur trade. That's how lucrative this was. In fact, I believe the two wealthiest men in the world were fur traders. The mountain men are not going to get rich from this. I'll explain how this works in just a minute, but that just demonstrates how big of a deal the fur trade was. It's an easy get-rich-quick scheme for these guys. John Jacob Astor, I believe, and I might be wrong on this, I believe he died on the Titanic. Richest man in the world. Anyway, he was an old man. Maybe it was his son. I don't know. Anyway, they're trappers. They go out look. Now, you got to be a special kind of guy to be a mountain man. Got to be probably a little bit nuts because you're going to head off into the mountains. You're going to live off of the land, so everything that you need to eat, you don't. There's no stores. You got to shoot it. You're going to trap in the middle of winter in the Rocky Mountains in 12 feet of snow, working your tail off, freezing to the bone, because the best time to trap furry creatures is in the winter. Their fur is thicker. So I don't know if any of you hunt like coyotes or raccoons or anything like that. You can sell those pelts. I don't think they're probably worth a whole lot right now. The demand for furs isn't what it was 100 years ago. But you can hunt those creatures, and now is a really good time to do it because their fur is as thick as it gets. My outside dog has really thick fur right now. If you have an outside dog, they're really poofy. My outside cat looks like a raccoon. One, he's really fat, and two, he's really furry. What happens in the spring when the weather gets nice to your outside dog? When you pet them, there's hair all over the place, right? You touch them and touch your clothes, and you're covered in animal fur, and it's like, so they shed it because they don't need as much fur in the summer. So middle of winter, trapping and living off the land, and there's hostile Indians sometimes in the area that you got to figure out how to get along with, and no company until you get together once a year. Mountain men would be invited to a thing called a rendezvous. It looks like rendezvous, but it's rendezvous. It's a French word that means a meeting, a get-together. So we could use the term today, like yesterday, right toward the end of your guys' lunch. I don't know. I think I caught them before they could do anything. But I'm walking down the hallway to go to the bathroom, and over on the other side of the lockers, I see Ella and Hunter. I think they were having a rendezvous. I think Hunter said, "Hey, Ella, when there's 4 minutes left before we go to 4th block, meet me behind the lockers in the 8th grade hallway. I'll go first. You just follow me. Don't let anybody see you." I think they had a rendezvous. What were they going to do? I don't know, but I caught them and turned them around and sent them back the other way. Hubba hubba. You guys going to Spider-Man Friday night? Well, yeah, Hunter. That's a rendezvous. It's sort of like a date. Okay, so here's how it works. That American Fur Company owned by John Jacob Astor, he'd have several of these on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Like, you ever been to Colorado Springs? It's sort of, here's Colorado Springs, here's the Rocky Mountains. So what he'd say is, hey, April, all of you mountain men, bring your furs to the other company is a Rocky Mountain Fur Company. It just hit me. Bring your furs down to Colorado Springs in April. The whole month we'll have a rendezvous. By that point, the furs are less quality. The creatures are starting to lose their furs, so it's kind of toward the end of the season. the snow's melting. So come down out of the mountains. It's been a long, cold winter, and bring your pelts with you. So Carson, the mountain man, comes. By the way, you have to be able to grow a really cool beard if you're going to be a mountain man. All mountain men have sweet beards. You can't be like a hairless mole rat if you're a mountain man. It doesn't. You don't look cool. So Carson, with the big old Santa Claus beard, comes out of the mountains, and he's got all of his beaver pelts and his mink and his foxes, whatever he's killed, on his pack horse. And he's coming down, gets to Colorado Springs to the rendezvous. There's other mountain men around. And he walks into the tent where the fur buyer is. And he sets down his pelts. And the fur buyer looks at the quality and he says, "Oh, this is pretty good. I'll give you $2 a pelt." And Carson's like, "What?" And he waves his arms around a lot. You got to imagine he's an arm waver. He says, "Last year they were $2.50. This is rotten. You're a cheat." Fur buyer says, "We'll take it or leave it." Does he really have a choice? Next closest fur buyer is probably 200 miles away. So fine, I'll take it. So he gets his money. And then John Jacob Astor, right next to the fur buying tent, has a mercantile set up, a shop. So CJ's lived in the hills for 6 months without seeing another human. He's out of supplies. He needs some coffee, maybe get a bag of sugar, because that'd be really nice. You're going to enjoy that for a while. Some flour, lots of salt, because you salt your meat. That's how you keep it from spoiling, because there isn't any refrigeration. Maybe he needs some new traps, because he's going to expand his trap line. And he also dropped his rifle in the river, so he needs a new rifle. So he spends almost all of the money that he got off of his furs, and with the money that's left, he buys whiskey. Hasn't had any all year. And this is the only time of the year that mountain men come together, and they have companionship. So all the other mountain men are just a bunch of dudes, but they have a good time together, and they tell stories. And do you think their stories were real? Heck no, they're exaggerated. If you go on a fishing trip and it's just you, and you come home and mom says, "Did you catch any?" Even though you didn't catch, "Oh, I had like 6 bass, and I think they were 4 pounds apiece. They were this big." We lie. It's like a fishing story. So these mountain man stories have just got to be blown out of proportion, completely false. But they enjoy one-upping each other. And they also turn it into sort of a rendezvous Olympics. So they have competitions. They have foot races. Who's the fastest mountain man? You got to think, too, these guys are probably pretty fit if you're living off the land and working your tail off. So they have foot races, they have wrestling matches, which I gotta think were probably more like an MMA competition than what we think of as wrestling. Tree climbing, they have shooting competitions to see who's the best marksman. They have axe throwing, knife throwing, and mostly partying. And they do this for a month long until they're out of money and they're out of whiskey, and then CJ loads up all of his stuff and he heads back up into the mountains and he lives for a while until it gets cold and he can start trapping furry creatures again. So is mountain manning really a profitable occupation? You do it because you like being alone. Some of you probably think, "I would love that. I wouldn't have to deal with other people, nobody to bother me." Now, I think about this sometimes because once in a while, it's not very often, and I'm not saying I dislike my family, but once in a while, like Tannen will be somewhere with Natalie and Taryn will be at work, and I've got the house all to myself, and I can sit wherever I want in the living room because I get the couch or the chair, maybe lay on the floor. Nobody's there to take my spot. I can watch whatever I want on the television. I can eat whatever I want for dinner. Nobody's there to tell me what to do or that I have to follow. So I think to a certain extent, all of us would appreciate that sometimes. I know you guys in particular, you're teenagers. I know what teenagers do. As soon as you get home, you disappear to your room because you don't want to be around your parents. You might be on the phone with your friends or playing video games with your friends, but you're not near your parents. You like to isolate yourself. If you guys haven't noticed how swole he's getting, notice his arms in his upper chest because he's been cranking out push-ups like a machine. Whatever. Every time he's playing video games with Tannen, I make him pause and do push-ups. So Ethan's been cranking them out like a madman, getting swole up top. Well, maybe. Going to Spider-Man this weekend.
I haven't seen it actually.
You should. It's a pretty good movie.
It's been out for like a month.
This is a reenactment, so there aren't any photographs of these real mountains. There are some photographs of these people, mostly drawings, but so this would be like the fur buyer that looks like a Monopoly man, and he's buying this beaver pelt that's stretched around a willow to keep it stretched, and this would be the seller. You know, they do these reenactments, and I think the people that do them are weirdos, but I think it's cool. So sometimes maybe you go to Fort Atkinson and they dress up like soldiers from the past, and they do. I think that's pretty cool. They fire off cannons, but I don't want to do it. I don't like pretending, I guess, that much. So they were trappers and traders, map makers, because they're the first ones there. They know the territory. If you want to head west into the Rocky Mountains, you better find a mountain man that can take you there because he knows where to go. Or once the wagon trains start heading across the country, like on the Oregon Trail, the best wagon train bosses were mountain men because they knew the best routes or the best paths through the mountains. So they became kind of multi-purpose, and that probably was more profitable than hunting furry creatures. I could see Zane, the mountain man with a great big beard, living up in the mountains. But Zane's kind of weird. He only traps skunks. If you're going to be a mountain man, you might as well specialize, right? So when you go to the fur trader guy, you're like, look, I got 47 skunks. Nobody wants to be around you at the rendezvous because you stink. I never been sprayed by a skunk. Knock on wood. Pepe Le Pew. Okay, this is where my story starts. So here's two of Ultimate Mountain Men. These are two tough guys. We've got Jim Bridger on your left, and we've got a guy named Hugh Glass on the right. Now I'm going to tell you, Hugh Glass, this is a story that you're probably never going to hear again. Again, you come to my history class, you get Mr. Bellamy's version of American history. You don't get the history book's version of American history. That's why we don't have a history book, because I think mine's better. Maybe I'm a little arrogant that way, but it's definitely more interesting. Of the two, if you had to run into these two men in a dark alley, oops.
That's not good.
If you had to run into these two men in a dark alley, which one would you be the most afraid of? Hugh Glass. That dude looks pretty good. This guy just looks like just a grandpa, you know.
It looks like he carries a gun.
But this guy, what's the deal with his necklace here? What are those?
Bear claws.
Bear claws. Okay, there's a real story that goes with this. By the way, I'm going to tell you this is a true story, and you're going to be like, oh my God. But it is a mountain man story, so it could be slightly exaggerated. But there were witnesses to much of it. So Hugh Glass and Jim Bridger were together for part of their mountain madness. Let me give you a little bit of background. Sorry, I just kicked you. Hugh Glass was born in 1773, and the story I'm going to tell you takes place in 1823. So a 50-year-old mountain man. I got to think that mountain manning was a pretty hard life, so I can't imagine mountain men lived a long time, yet, again, they had to be pretty fit, so I guess maybe so. So he's 50 years old as a mountain man. He's hired by the Army to lead an expedition up the Missouri River, through Nebraska Territory, through South Dakota Territory, to Yellowstone, where the Army has a camp. So the Army has to hire mountain men, including Hugh Glass, Jim Bridger, and another guy named John Fitzgerald. I don't have a picture of Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald is a weasel. He's not a good guy. You'll learn why in just a minute. Bridger, he's kind of a weasel. But Glass is 50 at the time of this expedition. Bridger is 19, which kind of makes him a boy in comparison with 50-year-old Glass. Fitzgerald, the other guy that we don't have a picture of here, was 23. That's a man, I guess. So we got a man, a young man, and an old man. The old man usually, because he's the oldest of the mountain men, he knows the most, but they don't all get along all that well. They're hired by the Army for 3 reasons. Get them to Yellowstone, because these are mountain men. They know how to get there, and they know the safest route. Feed the Army, so they've got hunting skills. They're going to be able to take care of this. I don't know, I'd say 20 or 25 Army men, just my guess. Feed the Army, and the most important, they're going to travel, when they travel through the heart of South Dakota, they're going to go through a territory that's controlled by a group of Indians called the Arikara. The Arikara had an extreme hatred for the white man. So if this army group runs into Arikara Indians, the Indians will slaughter them. Even though the army might have better guns, there's 20 of them and hundreds of Arikara. So Glass and Bridger and Fitzgerald were supposed to scout for food and watch for the Arikara and get the army to Yellowstone safely. So I want you to imagine this. One morning, it's a crispy, chilly day. They're out scouting. So it's normal for these 3 mountain men, these 3 scouts, to be in front of the army. So the army's back maybe a mile or so for their own safety. Glass, Bridger, and Fitzgerald are a mile in front and about a mile apart from each other. Why would they spread themselves out that far? Because they could better scout for Indians. And if they're hunting, if they're spread out, they got a better chance of finding something to eat. If we're all together, we only see the territory that's right in front of us. We don't see what's over there. So Bridger's closest to, Glass is closest to a creek, and he's walking through this very forested, wooded area in northern South Dakota. And over here, about a mile, we have Bridger, and he's walking stealthily. You got to walk quietly, because if you're hunting, you make a lot of noise and the creatures run away before you get to them. Or if there's a Arikara, you certainly want to find them before they find you. So they're stealthily walking. And then over here, another mile, you've got Fitzgerald. And then back here, a mile, you've got the army. So everyone's spread out for safety and for hunting. So Glass is walking stealthily through the woods when he hears behind him a twig snap. So he stops dead in his tracks, probably thinking, deer. So he slowly turns around with his rifle, pulls it up to his shoulder. It's not a deer, it's a bear cub. Where there's bear cubs, there's bear mamas. Bear mamas don't like anybody or anything near their cubs. So out of nowhere comes this bear mama, this grizzly bear mama, and jumps on top of Glass. He tries to fire his gun, but he can't get a shot off. The bear starts slashing at him with those 6-inch long claws, rips off part of his scalp, like the flap on top of his head is, his skull is showing. There's blood squirting out all over the place. The bear's jumping up and down on him, rips through his clothes and tears the skin off of his ribs, breaking a couple of ribs, and throws him around wildly, breaking his leg. Glass is toast. This bear is destroying him, and he can't do anything about it. At one point, the bear kind of goes into a little bit of a retreat, like probably goes off to check on its cub, turns around, and it gets ready to attack Glass again. Glass shoots it in the face, and it only ticks it off more. So it's thrashing around, it's jumping on Glass, it's bashing him up against trees. He's pretty much dead. The bear retreats one more time, turns around and comes back at him. Glass somehow musters up the energy to pull a knife. Remember, broken leg, his ribs, his head's flapping, his ribs are tore up. He's a busted man. Pulls a knife out, and as the bear attacks, he begins hacking at the heart of the bear through the side. Now, everyone hears this commotion. They hear the gunshot, and they hear, "Ah!" And they're like, oh my God, what's going on? Is it the Indians? So they all come running. But Bridger and Fitzgerald are a mile or 2 miles away, and the army is a mile away. It's going to take them some time to get there. And it's not like running a mile on the track. They're going over hills and trees, and they're following the noise, and then the noise stops. Takes them a while. They get to Glass. They come to this cliff, and they look down this cliff, and they're like, oh, my God. There's blood all over the place. Glass is bleeding profusely. And they look down this cliff, and there's this 900-pound grizzly bear laying on top of their friend Hugh. So they scurry down the hill, and they move the grizzly bear off of him, and his leg is sticking out sideways, and his ribs are exposed, and his head flat. And they're like, oh my God, this bear killed Glass. And Glass killed the bear while the bear killed him. Horrible story. And as they're standing there, they're like, oh, jeez, this is terrible. Glass sucks in a breath of air, and they're like, oh my God, he's not dead. His heart's barely beating, and he's only taking breaths every now and then, but he's not dead. So they kind of put his legs sort of normal, and they put the skin flap back on his head, and they put some bandages over his ribs, but they know he's gonna die. So they just get him comfortable. They don't even know if he can feel pain. He can't communicate. Once in a while, his eyes will open. He's in and out of consciousness, but he keeps sucking in breaths. Well, now, because of all this commotion, the army is really worried that the Arikara have been alerted, because if they're anywhere in the area, they've heard this, and they're going to come check it out, and they're all going to get slaughtered. So they stay for one day in this spot. They camp out here. The next day, the commander of the army says, we got to go. We can't stay here. And Bridger and Fitzgerald are like, this is bad. We know the area is full of Arikara. We got to go. So they put Glass on a stretcher, but they're going up and down hills, and they can't do it. So they finally stop, and the commander of the army says, hey, I tell you what, he tells the mountain men, I need 2 volunteers to stay with Glass and wait till he dies. He's one of our guys. We can't just leave him half dead here. So when he dies, dig a hole and bury him, give him a Christian burial, and then he'll be dead in a day or so, and then catch up with us. So Fitzgerald and Bridger, the guy offers them like a $50 bounty. He's going to pay them extra to stay. They're like, heck yeah, we're in. Also, Glass had with him on this expedition a half-breed son. Anybody know what that means? It was his son, but the mama of the boy was an Indian. So half-breed, he's half white and half Indian, which means, do you suppose he was respected by the others or equal to the others? No, he wasn't. He's biracial, and especially an Indian, half Indian boy, no. Glass didn't care, but everyone else thought the kid was useless. Glass is teaching him some mountain man stuff. So he's like, yeah, I'm staying with my dad. And then Bridger and Fitzgerald stay, and they're tending to Glass. And, they can't have a campfire, because if they light a fire, then the Arikara know they're there. Then they're really toast. So they're just sitting there shivering. And the next morning, Glass is still breathing. And Fitzgerald, this guy's a jerk. He's like, we got to go. And Bridger's like, we can't leave. So Bridger goes down to the stream to get some fresh water, and all of a sudden he hears, bam, a gun go off. He comes running back. He's like, what happened? And Glass's half-breed son is laying dead on the ground next to Glass, because he was going to fight these men to make them stay, and Fitzgerald doesn't want to stay. So Fitzgerald says, we got to go, Bridger. They stayed for 3 days, by the way. We got to go. There's no way the Arikara don't know we're here. They're going to kill us all. And I heard them last night. He's lying. But he tells Bridger, if we don't leave now, they're going to kill us. And they heard the gunshot. We made all this commotion. We got to go. So they steal everything. Bridger, he's like, I don't want to leave him. And Fitzgerald's like, well, we're leaving. They dig a hole like this deep, and they set Glass's body in it. He's still barely hanging on to life. They steal his gun. His gun's name was Lucretia. I guess if you're a mountain man, you name your gun so you have someone to talk to. They steal his possibles bag like a man purse. It has everything in it. Like, if we were to go off on an expedition and not know the next time we're going to have food, we're going to have some Slim Jims, some beef jerky, some granola bars, and a bag of Twizzlers, right? along with all of the ammunition we need for our rifle and probably a knife or a couple of knives. This is mountain man tools. They steal all of his stuff. They don't leave him naked. That's about it. They leave him in a hole in the ground with his son. Then, by the way, Glass was going in and out of consciousness this whole time. When Fitzgerald shot his son, he actually saw it and heard it. But he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't talk and he couldn't move. So imagine watching someone kill your son in cold blood. So he lays there in this hole. Well, these two take off. They catch up, and the commander of the soldiers like, good job. I'm sorry you had to do that. Did he die quickly? And they're like, yeah, he just went to sleep and didn't wake up. He's dead. They collected their bounty. Of course, it seemed like he was going to die. The guy there was pus growing in his wounds on his head and his ribs. His legs broken. There's no way he's going to survive this. But after who knows how many days, Glass kind of comes to full consciousness, and he's super fevered because all of this and this, nasty infections. So he's feeling horrible. He sees his dead son. But he has an emotion that's very, very powerful. He wants revenge. Revenge can consume a person. He wants to find Fitzgerald and Bridger for doing to him what they did. So he belly crawls, dragging his broken leg and his sore ribs and his floppy head over to the river and just lays in it. And it cools his fever and it washes out his wounds. And after doing this for a couple of days with no food, they didn't leave him anything, he finally takes the time and burns the energy to cover his son's body with stones so that animals don't consume it. And then the guy starts belly crawling. The nearest fort is 200 miles away, Fort Kiowa. He also has to watch for the Arikara. So this dude is so tough, he sets his own leg and splints it. And he drags himself, like army crawl, drags himself all the way across he goes up a hill, and at one point after a couple of days, the dude is literally starving to death. He sees a small buffalo carcass off in the distance, but it's being consumed by a pack of wolves. You crawl into a pack of wolves eating a buffalo, and they're going to eat you. So he has to wait. Eventually, the wolves run off. He belly crawls up to this rotting buffalo carcass, rotten raw meat, and just devours little scraps that he can find left. He's breaking open bones and sucking the marrow out of the bones. He has to get calories in himself. Then he continues belly crawling. He's gaining strength as he goes, but at one point, he crawls forward, and all of a sudden he looks down in front of him, and rattlesnake. Right in his face. So Glass slowly reaches back with his hand and grabs a stone, and ba-bam! Crushes the rattlesnake. Now he's got a to-go meal. So he's eating the raw rattlesnake, just like snapping off chunks. And he takes a couple of bites, but he knows he's going to need food later, so he takes the rest of the snake and stuffs it down his shirt. He eats on that snake for nearly a week. Can you imagine eating rotten, raw rattlesnake meat? Can't cook it because, one, he doesn't have the tools to start a fire, and if he did, it would attract the Arikara. At some point, he comes across a Pawnee Indian. Not knowing what tribe he's from, he took a real chance here, but he comes on. The guy's by himself. His family had been killed too by the Arikara. And the Pawnee, which I think his son might have been half Pawnee, so maybe Glass has a little bit of a communication with this guy. The guy tends to his wounds, places maggots on the wounds, here and here, and you're like, gross. Maggots don't eat living flesh. They only eat dead flesh. So they eat the rot and the pus off of his wounds, cleaning it out. The Indian cleans him up a little bit, cleans his head, puts him in a sweat lodge for like 2 days, sweating out some of the sickness. By the time he's done, Glass now has a walking stick, like a crutch, and he can kind of hobble along. He walks all the way to a river, builds himself a raft. This is several months in the process. Floats down the river to Fort Kiowa. Glass gets to Fort Kiowa, Bam, bam. He's knocking on the door to the fort. They open up the door. Now, word doesn't travel really fast back then, but the men inside Fort Kiowa knew the story of this bear attack on Glass. And they see this dude whose face is tore up and his ribs and his leg is broken, and they're like, oh my God, we thought you were dead. And he's like, obviously I'm not dead, you jackwagon. They bring him in, they feed him, they give him a doctor, they take care of him. He stays there for about a week. He's still a mess. And he says, where are Fitzgerald and Bridger? Well, last we heard, sir, they're at Yellowstone at the fort. So Glass says, that's where I'm going. Would you give me a horse? No, no, sir, you need to stay for a couple more weeks. You're not ready to go. But he takes off anyway, gets to Yellowstone. Now imagine, bam, bam, knocks on the gates of Yellowstone at the fort, and they open up the fort, and the men inside are like, you're dead. Fitzgerald and Bridger told us the whole story. There's no way that's you, Glass. And he's like, well, obvious I'm not dead, you jackwagons. They bring him in. Obviously, the commanding officer is upset because he paid those men to watch over him until he died. So, Glass says, I want to talk to Fitzgerald and Bridger. He's going to kill him. He's mad. For good reason. And I think probably all of us would feel the same emotions. Commanding officer says, well, Fitzgerald's not here, but I will let you talk to Bridger. So he goes and gets Bridger. Can you imagine the fear? Bridger was just a kid, 19 years old. You imagine someone says, hey, Bridger, there's someone here to see you. Who is it? It's Hugh Glass. So Glass meets with him, and Bridger breaks down in tears. They're like, I'm so sorry, sir. I wanted to stay. I told him we couldn't leave you, but I was afraid. Glass, remember, he was in and out of consciousness that whole time. He knows Bridger wasn't the bad guy. He knows Fitzgerald is the one that talked him into this. So he says, fine, I'll let you live. He lets Bridger live. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I won't ever leave a man to die again. That's this guy, the tough guy right here. He says, where's Fitzgerald? Here's a story that gets kind of interesting. He says, well, last I heard, Sir Fitzgerald joined the army, and he's in Nebraska territory in a fort called Fort Atkinson. Fitzgerald was in Fort Calhoun. Fort Atkinson is Fort Calhoun. So he makes himself a raft and he floats down the Missouri River and he shows up at Fort Atkinson. Bam, bam, bam. They're like, oh my God, we thought you were dead. He goes, where's Fitzgerald? Commanding officer of the fort comes out and says, hold on, slow your roll. You can't kill Fitzgerald because he's in the army. Can't kill a soldier. You're going to be sentenced to death if you do that. I want to talk to him. And the commanding officer says, I'll let you talk to him, but just remember, you can't kill him. Now, Fitzgerald wasn't in the fort at the time. He was off cutting firewood. So can you imagine Fitzgerald when someone, hey, Fitzgerald, Fitz, there's someone here to see you. He's like, oh, who is it? It's Hugh Glass. Oh, crap. Fitzgerald probably is thinking he's going to kill me, and he probably deserves to be dead. But Fitzgerald walks back to the fort, his head down, thinking, oh, my God. But he makes a really smart move, and instead of going straight to the, by the way, the commanding officer is meeting with them. He's not going to let Glass tear into this guy. He's going to be in there with him. But Fitzgerald walks back to his barracks where he's sleeping, and underneath the mattress of his bed is Lucretia, Glass's rifle. So he gets the rifle, and he heads to this meeting with Glass, and he says, sir, I'm so sorry. He's a jerk, but he knows if he doesn't apologize for this and do it the right way, he's going to get dead. He hands Glass over his rifle, and he makes amends, and Glass like, oh, dang it! And he lets him live. Now, by letting these two men live, they also have to live knowing in their conscience that they left a man for dead that had to go through HELL hockey stick to survive. The torture that Glass went through and all the pain that he had gone through was their fault. But maybe we would have made the same decision. Glass lives almost 10 more years. Anyone want to guess what ends up killing him? He goes on several more very similar expeditions. He's a tough dude. He survives it and continues doing it. He gets killed by the Arikara, the Indians that he was trying to avoid. So I told this story for like 15 years, and I'm like, this is a great story. And it's as true as we can possibly imagine a mountain man story be. And I'm like, I can't believe nobody made this into a movie. Then one day I'm sitting in my chair and I'm watching television, and here comes a commercial for this new movie, and I'm like, this looks kind of good. It's called The Revenant, the Hugh Glass story. So they made a movie. Leo DiCaprio is Hugh Glass in The Revenant. So it's probably 7 or 8 or 10 years ago. This is what real mountain men look like, by the way. Probably more like this one. Anyway, I should switch that over, put Schwartz's face in there since he's the boss around here now. But I should put Schwartz and Wazorek maybe in there. Maybe I'll do that. This is where the bear attacked him. This is where he had to get to. So that's what he went through with his broken leg and his tore up ribs and no food and no ammunition and no gun and no fire. That's a walk that most of us wouldn't survive. This is a clip from The Revenant, but my favorite part of the clip from The Revenant is this. Do you want to see, how much time do we have? A couple minutes? 10, 12 minutes? Okay. Do you want to see the bear scene from The Revenant? Now, the biggest problem with this movie is it's dark. Like when you watch it, every scene is kind of dark, and so is this one. So it's probably filmed that way because darkness hides things. And it was made on a green screen, so obviously there's not a real bear attacking him. In fact, there's a video on YouTube that shows how they made this scene, and it's kind of cool. Anyway, so this is the bear attack scene. It can't feel good. That can't feel good either. 800 or 900 pound bear laying on you. So I think as far as Hollywood goes, they did a pretty good job of portraying my story about Hugh Glass. But there's also a book, but it was written a long time ago, and usually books that are written a long time ago, unless they're like super special, It's kind of hard to read. It's not as entertaining. Now there is, if you decide, have any of you watched The Revenant? Have you seen it before? If you ever decide to watch it, and I'm not going to show you this video because there's a video that describes the difference between the real Hugh Glass and the Hugh Glass that was portrayed in The Revenant. It's kind of interesting, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense until you watch the movie. By the way, in one point in his escape, so as he's healing, he needed a horse really badly, so he kind of crawled in upon an encampment of Arikara. They were around a campfire for the evening, and their horses were tied up a little distance away from them, so he stole a horse from the Arikara. This guy's tough. He should be our mascot. Instead of the Blair Bears, we should be the Blair Hugh Glasses, because he defeated the bear. Probably the most famous of the mountain men in American history are Kit Carson, Carson City, Nevada, named after him. And in this one, Jedediah Smith. If you read Mountain Man stories, Jedediah Smith is in all of them. He's almost turned into a comic book character. So his popularity rivals all of them. Nobody's ever heard of Hugh Glass unless you watch The Revenant or come to my class. But most people that know any history or westward expansion history know Jedediah Smith. He goes from mountain man to wagon train boss. He's in movies and all sorts of stuff, or portrayed in movies and all sorts of stuff. So he's kind of a big deal. I like this mountain man because he has a cool eye patch. And again, all mountain men have to have a sweet beard. It's like a requirement. Shaving when you live by yourself. Think about that. If you live all by yourself in that little log house in the woods, how important is personal hygiene? Yeah, I'm probably going to stop shaving. I don't know, though. I don't like my own stink. But I can't smell anything because of COVID anyway, so maybe I don't care if I stink at that point. Boys are like, it depends. Are there any girls around? Hunter's like, if Ella doesn't go to school here, I'm never washing myself again. Your jacket's very fuzzy today, Ella. I like it. Thinking about getting one like it. Oh, here's some skunks. There's Zane. You must, maybe this is Zane right there. That guy doesn't have as sweet of a beard, but if you're not going to have a really sweet beard, you should have a pretty cool mustache, and that's a pretty good mustache. And a big old babushka hat. You tell me, among you, who wouldn't wear that hat in the wintertime? Heck yeah, I want one. That'd be sweet, wouldn't it? Big old bearskin hat on your head, or I don't know what kind of fur that is. Well, Zane's going to have a skunk hat.
That would be actually pretty cool.
Well, yeah, maybe.
If there's
Big white stripe down the middle. But that guy, that's a lot of fur. It's a big old bear skin and, I don't know, some little weasels or marmots or whatever. And these are all beaver pelts, so that guy probably made a pretty good living that winter. Different beaver pelt hats that are made. Again, pretty sweet beards. If you have a nice beard, like it says there, they carry wisdom and also crumbs. You can save food for later. Put a chocolate cookie in there if you want to. It's a better storage place. Well, I think probably that one over there. So I would wear that. For real, if I killed a bear, I would wear its head as a hat. For sure. No question about it. All right. That's a good place for us to stop today before we get to further westward expansion with the Santa Fe Trail. Make sure those